Mm. Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm so glad that you're here. This is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. And I feel so excited that David is here with us. He is a specialist, an expert in the field. And yeah, I thought I would take a moment to introduce myself, to allow David to introduce himself before we begin. My name is Eleanor Bramwell, and I am the co founder of Inner Path Wellness, which is a psychedelic assisted therapy and holistic wellness center. And David, welcome. We're so glad to share this space with you.
Thanks, Eleanor. My name is David Avruch. I'm a clinical social worker in private practice, mostly as a couples therapist here in Baltimore. And I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Oh, so sort of behind the scenes details. There are several folks that have come to Inner Path that have told me that they have the best couples therapist ever. And I, of course, am always like, great, we need referrals. Who do you see? And it has every single time been you, David. And so I'm not even kidding.
Thank you for gassing me up. I want to really I want to be explicit. I'm not an expert in either couples therapy or attachment theory. Um, I just I'm just passionate about this stuff. And it's just funny that you said it's near and dear to your heart because it's like whether you know it or not, attachment theory is dear to all our hearts. Because this is it's the roadmap that allows us to explore matters of the heart.
Hmm.
And I think that I really want to just again be clear, like I'm not coming at this from an expertise position. I have not read all that there is to read. I haven't read Bowlby, Ainsworth, all of the people who came before. I'm really more of an applied attachment theory guy. And I practice emotionally focused therapy, which is an evidence-based practice for couples. And it really, what EFT did, we actually are in a state of grieving right now because we lost our founder last week, Sue Johnson, passed away from cancer. It's devastating. But what Sue did was take the tenets of attachment theory and apply them to couples therapy in a way that had not been done before. And that was really the breakthrough of EFT. And so I practice in that lineage and in that style, and I combine it with internal family systems as well.
Ah, I'm just noticing I have some chills. Yeah, hearing you share that, it makes me think about a conversation my partner and I have often. We truly believe that if couples, the critical, there was a critical mass of couples with securely functioning attachment, that our society would heal within 2 generations because
Mhm.
children come up with a completely different paradigm.
Yeah.
And so it to me feels like one of the most important conversations we can have for our children's children and the well being of what it means to be human upon the earth. And
I
so, with
love that so much. Yeah.
no, please. Yeah.
Well, I think that that first of all, yes. And second of all, as a social worker, for me, it's always necessary to talk about the equity and social justice elements of attachment because unfortunately, secure attachment is more of a privilege than a right in our current society. And we know that racism, material impoverishment, homophobia, transphobia, these forces reduce access to secure attachment within romantic relationships by applying pressure and stress on individual systems of psychological functioning and on partnership systems. And so secure attachment is not just an emotional issue, it's also a political and economic issue as well. And so we have to locate it within these broader systems. And so I always say that we need to be talking about attachment justice, not just about the attachment itself.
Wow. There's my heart emoji. I don't think I've actually heard that presence before. And I'm going to move in a moment into a high level overview of the attachment system because I think that context might make this conversation even more relevant to all of the viewers of this recording. Um, but I am really excited to potentially have follow-up conversations with you and or educational spaces where we can talk about the social justice complexity and how this is actually a result of systemic injustice. And I've never heard someone presence that before. My background is trauma, so which is a very similar conversation. Trauma is associated with zip code. It's complicated. So without further ado, hi everybody. Just a very short introduction to a high level overview of the attachment system. I think that will be kind of like a map for us. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. Can everybody see it? Great. Technology and I are always working things out, so I don't take that for granted. Okay. So, a high level overview of the attachment system. And we have quite a few other slides. David is going to share all kinds of great stuff. But today, I'm going to start our conversation with just a little introduction to what this even is or means. So, high level overview. In the wild, a baby chimpanzee would survive for about 1 hour if it lost connection with its mother because it would be eaten by a predator. And so baby chimpanzees have developed a proximity seeking system where they understand they are more likely to survive if they're in close proximity with a caregiver, a primary attachment bond. So, you know, we're basically hairless chimps. And so we share this. We share this attachment seeking system. It is a survival oriented system. And as we evolved, and I am sharing this through the lens of evolution because that's my personal training, but all viewpoints are welcome here. As we have evolved, our species has learned that we're more likely to stay alive if we have a close connection with a primary caregiver. And so the attachment system effectively is our strategies for figuring out how to maintain that connection, right? And so some children learn that if they take care of a younger sibling, connection stays available. Some children have learned if they get sick all the time, or if they're really good at music, more connection is available. And other children learn that their parents are pretty stressed and stretched, and if they have less needs, more connection is available. So when we start to look at the attachment system in this way, it's incredibly depathologizing. We're stripping away any kind of good or bad. We're starting to acknowledge that many of our unconscious behaviors are simply strategies for survival. And in fact, we can start to look at these strategies from a lens of gratitude and compassion and recognize how brilliant our little teeny tiny self was to learn these fascinating ways of staying in connection with our caregivers. So I'll pause here for a moment in case there's any questions before I continue. And I am noticing the chat window, so I'll start there. Oh, great. Yeah, are there any questions so far? Amazing. Okay. So I reflected for a very long time before this webinar because the attachment system is something I teach a lot about from a theoretical level, and I have a lot of training in. And I got so excited. I can geek out on this stuff for like 18 hours. I'm like, it's just so fascinating to me. But where I landed is that a very simple overview is actually what's relevant as we now have a map to understand, oh, the hidden dynamics that are playing out in my primary pair bond and my connection with my mom and my friend group, oh, this might be where it's coming from. So, with that, David, I'd love to hand it over to you to start sharing some of how this actually shows up in couplehood. Would that be okay?
Absolutely. And thanks for that. Thanks for grounding us in evolutionary theory, because that is the right place to start, is that for our species and many other species, attachment equals survival, period.
Mhm, 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 mhm.
And everything flows from that reality. And the uniqueness of our species. So one attachment theory says a lot of things. And so we, an hour is not sufficient. And so one of the things that attachment theory says, at least the way that EFT people, emotionally focused therapy people talk about it, is we say that our species is unique in its capacity to form bonds with other members of the species, romantic, sexual, political, religious, professional, familial, social, you name it. Our capacity for bonding is unique in the animal kingdom. We don't have the biggest muscles in the animal kingdom. We don't have the biggest brains either. But our capacity for bonding is unique. And that is what has allowed us to create such civilizational structures as we have. That's the top side of the coin. And the underside of the coin, of that same coin, is for human beings, loss of connection, rejection, isolation, ostracization are inherently traumatizing, period.
Yes. Yes.
Right. And so that's, again, like, it always comes back to politics for me. This is why we should all be talking about the need to eliminate solitary confinement as a form of punishment. We know that that constitutes torture. That's an act of torture. We know that from science. And so attachment theory it's not just about bonding, it's also about how we structure our society. Okay. Yeah, I feel really strongly about that about that piece. And if you want to get involved with political efforts to undo solitary confinement, follow up with me afterwards and I can connect you with that movement. Um,
David, can I
yeah,
add
you
just a tiny bit to
please.
that?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So, hearing from David and understanding that our attachment system is linked to survival, that means that it's very closely connected to our nervous system, which is our survival physiology. And so, what we're hearing in this moment is that belonging equals survival. And Dr. Gabor Mate, he is one of the pioneers of the trauma theory world. We are so grateful to that man's work. I stand on his shoulders every day. He says that human beings need two things: they need authenticity and belonging, and that they will always trade authenticity for belonging because of survival. And so the people pleasing, the 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 look at me, let me show you how great I am. These strategies, these are part of our ways of attempting to survive unconsciously. And when we feel a loss of connection, even in social groups, that is not just emotional pain. There is actually a part of us, like David was sharing, that is terrified we will die. And so, for those of you that have teenagers, that is one of the reasons teenagers are willing to do what the group does, because the experience of the pod literally means life. And so, what's occurring to me in this moment is that this webinar is actually in service of us starting to create a new society of belonging, a new way of being together. Thank you for letting me jump
Please keep jumping in.
in.
These are essential wisdoms. And yeah, to what you were naming, you said Mate is distinguishing between the need for connectivity and what was the other one? Authenticity?
Authenticity.
Yeah. And and it's interesting that we often experience those needs as in opposition, right? So like in couples, there's usually an argument, explicit or implicit, around how to balance connectedness and autonomy. that's a classic. And every couple has to kind of find their own level for where to set the dial on how do we gain sufficient connectedness without relinquishing sufficient autonomy. And I think in EFT, what we believe is that you don't have to choose between the two, that you can have both. In fact, that secure attachment complements autonomy and vice versa, and that you need both. Right. And so you don't, I think that it's complicated because sometimes I want to be totally independent and I want to be a particle floating in the universe, unencumbered by my connections to anything. And sometimes I find that I want to merge with my partner completely and climb inside my partner's existence and just reside there for a while and not have to be a person. And so I think that anywhere on those two, on that spectrum is a totally valid place to be and to want. And that actually, and our needs are dynamic and they change. And some days I want to be a particle and some days I want to merge, and most days I want something in between. And that negotiating that is possible, right? And that's the bulk of what couples therapy consists of, is doing a good faith, open negotiation around balancing divergent but valid sets of needs, often around autonomy and connectedness. So would it be good to look at the PowerPoint, Eleanor?
Yeah, and what I'll do is give you permission, and then you can move them as it works well for you.
Okay, great. Any questions before I share more things? Cool. All right, feel free to whatever, jump in or throw questions in the chat. There's not that many of us here. Okay,
yeah, people sign up for these webinars and watch the recordings later.
Right, you were saying that. All right. Where is my this? Cool. All right. Present. Okay. Cool. Okay, so I'm gonna share my screen. By the way, having to do technology in front of people is one of my fear dreams that I have, and so just bear with. All right, cool. Okay, is that working right now?
Crushed it.
Hey, all right, cool. So if you want to geek out on the actual history of attachment theory, this is a graphic novel that I really love and highly recommend. Alison Bechdel is a treasure, and she wrote the graphic novel Fun Home, which is one of the most important graphic novels of the 20th century. And this one, Are You My Mother, came out a couple years ago, and she does a deep dive into the history of attachment theory. It's about her relationship with her mom. But I just love this. Is really a good way to go if you like. All right, cool. So yeah, so what do we talk about in EFT? This is emotionally focused therapy. We're focused on emotion. The reason that we focus on emotion is because if you jump to number 3, emotions organize attachment processes for human beings. That statement is worth repeating. It's very technical. Emotions organize attachment processes for human beings. What that means is that, number 1, emotion is the music of the dance of attachment. Okay, so just like when you're dancing, if somebody puts on a record and the music is no good, you can't dance. You can't dance good if it's not your music, if the music isn't right. And it's the same with the dance of attachment. When the emotional flow is conducive, then the processes of attachment can flow naturally and organically. And so in EFT, the therapist is not the holder of wisdom, is not the expert about attachment, whatever. I have my own marriage. I have my own problems with attachment. I'm not Mr. Perfect. I'm just a facilitator of a really natural process of attachment, and I know how to use emotion in that way. So think about it like this. In cognitive therapy, you're turning the wheel of cognition, right? Focusing on thoughts, looking at thoughts, Behavioral therapy, you're turning the wheel of behavior. Have healthy behaviors, you will be less depressed. Go for a jog, do your mindfulness meditation, turn that wheel of behavior to generate that outcome. And in EFT, we're turning the wheel of emotion. And we trust that if we evoke emotional responses, share them with the partner, assist the partner to receive them, that generates its own emotional response, then you share it back. Doing that process over and over and over again will facilitate attachment. So we just turn that wheel. And that's very theoretical, but that's the kind of basic task of couples therapy as I practice it. And it's rooted in attachment theory. Like, it's rooted in the belief that no matter how we act on the outside, deep down, everyone is searching for a deep, reliable, safe, emotional connection. Whether we know it or not, whether we act like it or not, we all want it. And so our emotions move us toward that, right? When we get really sad, it means that we don't have the connection that we want. When we get really afraid, it means that we're worried about losing connection. And so heightening those emotions, getting people to articulate them and why they feel them, that generates, that facilitates an attachment process. And again, that's a little theoretical, but that's the nature of the game. So in EFT, we believe in the idea of universal attachment needs. I think I kind of believe in universal attachment needs. Here's some popular ones: to be and feel loved, to trust that your other person will be there in your time of need, to have a safe haven, to be understood, accepted, seen, comforted, compassion, validation, respect, sex, and non-sexual physical touch. Eleanor, do you want to jump in at any point? Please feel free.
Thanks. I sure appreciate the invitation.
Okay. And, validating people's attachment needs is easy because we all have these needs, right? And so there's something really soothing for clients who are in distress because of their unmet attachment needs when we take the time to validate, yeah, you're sad because you're lonely. That makes sense. In EFT, we more or less believe that distress in relationships is connected to unmet attachment needs. And so we are always naming what the unmet attachment need is. And sometimes we do that with the explicit intention of evoking an emotion. Wow, it's funny, you seem totally cool and normal and collected when you talk to me about feeling alone, but that sounds really lonely. Is that, do you feel sad when you talk about that? Right? And so the therapist has a bit of a relentlessness in the way that she evokes the emotional response to not having that attachment need met. And the reason that it's valuable to invite somebody to take the risk to talk about their loneliness and their sadness, if I can get you to risk talking about feeling sad because you feel alone, then I can turn to your partner and be like, wow, like, what's it like for you when you hear how sad she is? And then usually the partner says, I feel a lot of compassion, because that's the human response. Sometimes they say, I feel irritated, I feel frustrated, I feel resentful. And those are also great responses, because that's a frank, honest, you're putting your card on the table, right? You're saying, I would like to be compassionate toward you, but I can't because I'm pissed off at you because XYZ. And that takes us to the next step in the therapy. And so couples therapy is this process of taking the risk of putting your cards face up on the table one by one, trusting that there's a finite amount of cards that need to be played, that they're all connected to our unmet attachment needs. And that once all the cards are face up on the table, we can mess around with them and organize them.
I will jump in for a moment. I love this. And I'll go ahead and pin myself so folks can see me. Hi, everybody. So what David is sharing is, it sounds really simple in practice, but it's simple, not easy. And just a little teeny tiny trick that can be helpful is if someone is sharing their needs, if you imagine that your heart becomes an ear, or if you imagine that you're crossing a rainbow bridge into that person's inner world, and recognize that it's actually an incredible privilege to be let into another person's inner world. That when they're brave enough to reveal what's happening, that's an honor. And the reason this can be challenging is because, especially in primary pair bonds and couplehood, often feelings are being shared when both people have feelings. And so we both are, just like David shared, universal, maybe. I happen to think this one is. Both partners need to be heard and understood. And so whoever is able to do the hearing first creates space for magic. And the other thing David spoke to that feels really relevant and so important to highlight with kindness is that many of us, have learned to bury the feelings that exist within us because our society does not have a tolerance or safe landing place for a lot of feelings. And not everybody had a parental structure where feelings were heard, understood, and known. And so it's completely normal. If you have buried certain feelings, there's actually an opportunity to celebrate, again, that strategy of managing and figuring out how to keep your inner world together.
Gorgeous. Thank you. Yeah. I love that. It's always risky to allow another person into your inner world, right? And it's an act of trust and it's risk. I think there's a saying that I reflect on a lot that comes from Black culture, which is this idea of intimacy means into me see, right? Wow. You're allowing someone to see inside of you. And that is the definition of intimacy. And I love that because it's real. And setting them up to make that a safe experience it's a privilege to get to do that, because that's what can generate what therapists like to call an emotionally corrective experience. Right? If we shared our feelings with our parents or with a previous partner and that did not go well, being able to do that in this relationship and having it go well is healing. So yeah, talking more about attachment styles, these days, one of my, what we observe is that attachment theory is kind of trickling down into the mainstream of discourse, which is cool. And I think that there's advantages to that. And I think that also sometimes there can be like a flattening of the nuances of the theory that can occur with the Instagramification of attachment theory, And so one of my pet peeves with this is that I feel like sometimes you hear people talk about attachment styles as though they are your like astrological chart. I am this, therefore that, right? I'm like this, therefore that. And that's not the truth of attachment styles. Attachment styles are contextual and dynamic. And contextual means certain people evoke certain attachment energies from me, and other people evoke other styles, right? My spouse might evoke a secure attachment style from me, and my cousin evokes an avoidant attachment style from me, and that's just, it's mysterious in that way, and that's one of the things that I love about it. But they're not definitive. It's not like tattooed on your soul that you have a certain attachment style, and also that they're dynamic, that trauma, right, or attachment loss can change your attachment style, and connection and emotionally corrective, safe experiences of bonding can change your attachment style too. And so sure, identify with an attachment style, but hold it lightly and be open-minded to what the experience of connection can offer. And so, back to this concept of secure attachment complements autonomy, you don't have to choose, right? That, we don't really know enough about this idea of what we call personality or temperament. The science isn't there yet to describe how, on a genomic level, right, like expressions of genes and activities create our preferences for how to be a person in the world. But what we know is that people's Legos are put together in different kind of ways, right? And some people prefer more independence and some people prefer more connection. And it's all good. Like, doesn't I don't have a hierarchy in ways of being a person. I think that there's a lot of really awesome ways to be a person. And so for me, it boils and also like complementary energies tend to seek each other out in romantic contexts, right? And like if you need proof of that, just watch every movie or every song ever written about, falling in love. Opposites attract and all that. And so we will always find people having needs that seem to be in conflict, wanting to be connected to one another romantically. And so for me, it's about how do we negotiate? How do you get enough autonomy and how do I get enough connectedness? And I trust that when the desire for attachment is present and the motivation is also present, then you can do that negotiation. That can be done. Secure attachment is another catchphrase that you hear a lot about. For me, the essence of secure attachment is knowing where you stand with someone. It doesn't always mean that you're in good standing with someone, but it means knowing where things stand between you. And insecure attachment means I don't know where I stand with you. And having that experience of insecure attachment can generate all kinds of behaviors, technically what we call protest behaviors, which look different for different people based on your attachment style, your temperament, your personality. But the essence is, I know where I stand with you. And so even if I've let you down and you're upset with me, but I still can trust that our connection is intact and going to be repaired, then our attachment is secure. And so in couples therapy, we have this language that we use around earned secure attachment, right? Which is like, sometimes you gotta do that work to get to secure attachment. I talk about secure attachment as a dotted line. And when you're below the dotted line, which is where most couples come into couples therapy, like everything feels hard. Everything feels hard. Every argument, the stakes are super high. Disconnection is devastating. Little things turn into big things, right? Old stuff comes up in conversations that are unresolved. And when you're on the other side of the dotted line, when you're in secure attachment, what you observe is little stuff doesn't matter as much. Things roll off your back much more easily. You're just able to trust that this is going to be okay, even if it's imperfect or annoying or disconnected right here, right now. And so it's hard. It's just really hard to be in that state of insecure attachment. And I have so much compassion for that because we all know what that's like. And secure attachment, when couples get there, I just see them flooded with relief when they say, like, yeah, we had an argument over the weekend, but we kind of bounced right back and we were still able to enjoy our day. And like, that's the win. Like couples therapy, that's the thing is all couples argue, like sharing your life with another person, let's be honest, it's a pain in the ass. But we do it because for most of us, it's better than being alone. And there's a lot of benefit and joy that comes. So arguments are inevitable because sharing your life is difficult. Okay, so what's the win? How do we know that we're good to go? It's when arguments are tolerable, when the frequency of arguments is tolerable, the intensity of arguments is tolerable, and we're able to bounce back from that argument into that state of reconnection in a reasonably quick way. And so what we observe is that every couple has what we call that negative cycle. I certainly have mine with my spouse, where there's hot button topics where we, argue in scripted, rigid ways. And before we really had kind of settled into a secure bond, those arguments felt existential sometimes. Are we going to survive this? And when you're in that state of earned secure attachment, it's like, ugh, okay, we're in this argument again. How long is this going to take? I know this is going to be okay. This is a pain in my butt. And so the arguments never go to 0.0, but the cycle becomes so de-escalated that you just still get to enjoy yourself, enjoy your life, enjoy your connection, and enjoy your weekend. And that's sort of what we're going for, is a de-escalated cycle and that couple in that state of earned secure attachment. Eleanor, any sharings here?
Yes, thanks so much for the invite. Secure attachment is possible for all of us. The attachment system is a relatively rigid system, but it is moldable and pliable. And with the support of a really good attachment focused guide, therapist, coach, it really is viable, or if your relationship has enough resource in that space. And the latest literature says it takes about 4 years to move from insecure attachment to secure attachment. But I've seen it happen faster than that. And police officers, there's quite a bit of literature that suggests that police officers often have secure attachment with their driving partner. This is incredible. This is a person that they are relying on for their life, and in some ways has the position of primary pair bond. If police officers can develop and earn secure attachment with their driving partner, so can we. And there will be so much more in this webinar, but just to name it, the journey of moving from insecure to secure is challenging. It's uncomfortable because, again, our nervous system, we're wired for survival. So when we start to make different choices than the old survival physiology oriented, insecure, protective connection strategies, when we start to make healthier choices, there's a part of us that feels like we might die because the other one worked. But if we're willing to stretch and be uncomfortable, the fruit and benefit of secure attachment is like freedom. It's like actually getting to live the life that is here for you instead of being ruled by knee-jerk reactions that have big consequences. And so I want this for everybody. I believe in us all. It's challenging work, but it's worth it.
Cool. Yeah, for real. Totally. And I think that's the thing, is once you get to a state of secure attachment, it's not as though your problems are all solved. Like, you still have to be a person in the world and go back to your life the next day and all that. But it's actually that the foundational cornerstone of your experience is trustworthy and safe and reliable, right? In EFT, we talk about what's the point of a relationship. And we believe that the relationship serves a couple core functions: to be a safe haven from the outside world, right? And this is particularly true for minority couples, for Black couples, for gay couples. Like, the outside world is a hostile place. And so the relationship has to be a really safe space where you can recharge your spiritual and emotional batteries. So safe haven is one of the purposes of the relationship. And the flip side of that coin, the other purpose, is that it's what we call a secure base. It's that space you can launch yourself out off of to go back out into the world and be brave and do the things that you need to do.
Oh, I love that.
And yeah, so those elements of safe haven, secure base, that is what is provided by secure attachment. And it's just kind of the emotional, psychological, and spiritual benefits having that are obvious. And also just the science, the data backs it up, right? That people in securely attached, quote unquote, happy romantic partnerships are much healthier than people in unhappy relationships. Single people do okay. They do fine, a lot of them. But a secure attachment reduces lifespan global mortality by 10 to 15%, which is equivalent to quitting smoking and being fully vaccinated. It activates your immune system. You become healthier when you're in a state of secure attachment. So it just, it matters. The stakes are high. But like Eleanor said, like our historic strategies, that we use to stay safe in our childhood or in our previous romantic connections, they may not be the ones that are going to serve us to access secure attachment with our person and in right here, right now. And it's super gendered as well, right? Like what we notice is that our society tends to not be interested in male emotionality. Women are kind of quote unquote allowed to be quote unquote emotional, and men are kind of not. I mean, obviously, how society reacts to women's emotions is also problematic in many ways. But what I observe with men, particularly heterosexual cisgender men, is that the emotions that men are allowed to have consist of anger and horny, and that's basically it, right? And so what we observe about anger for men is that it often is the emotion through which the emotions of sadness and fear or shame travel, right? And so a therapist's job is to uncover, what is this emotion trying to say, and how is that guiding our dance of attachment? And so just kind of turning that wheel 100 times. What is this anger about feeling afraid? Or is it just that you're mad that something happened that you didn't like, right? Sometimes anger is what we call a primary emotion. Sometimes it's a secondary emotion. It's our way of expressing fear without having to do the vulnerability of being afraid and showing that we're afraid. So emotion is understood to be the music of the dance of attachment. All right. So, what are the key questions of attachment? Are you there for me? Will you come when I call? Can I reach for you when I need you? Do you value me and see me as special? We all need these things from our spouse. When a baby is born, they can't really do very much, right? What does a baby know how to do when it comes out? She can breathe, she can suck, and she can reach. And that's basically it. And the reach is innate, right? And that is the attachment drive. That is that reaching for connection. And so it's intrinsic and universal. To reach for human connection is the most human thing of all. And so I am just really always very moved emotionally to bear witness to people reaching for one another, because I also reach. We all do. And what we're all looking for are yeses to these questions, right? Will you be there? We use the acronym ARE, accessible, responsive, engaged. Are you those things for me? When my partner is trying to share a story with me and I'm preoccupied or looking at my phone or whatever, he'll make fun of me and he'll say he'll say that I'm buffering, or like we've started a new joke where he'll pretend that he's on he's like on a customer service line talking to some AI chatbot, and he'll just start saying, speak to an agent, speak to an agent, you know? And so it's just like, it's a good joke, but it speaks to the need to be attended to,
Mhm.
right? Are you paying attention to me or not? This is an attachment need. When I became a couples therapist, and I've been with my partner since before I became a social worker. So like, he's been to all the trainings I've been to because I've made him listen to me explain it every night at dinner. And so when I learned about attachment and doing all this stuff, one of the, we use technical terms like attachment injury, right? A time when you weren't there for me in my moment of need, that was an injury to our attachment, to our trust, right? And so, and now we just joke like, if I don't want to go to Wegmans and I want to go to the Giant, that's an attachment injury. Like you can be silly with it, but yeah, these are some of the key questions. So this is more EFT language, pursuers and withdrawers. In EFT discourse, we use this language more than we use anxious versus avoidant attachment style. Pursuer withdrawer language kind of maps onto anxious and avoidant, perhaps not perfectly. It hasn't super been clearly delineated in the literature, but it's basically about how do you react to attachment insecurity, right? Pursuers, like myself, tend to push, pull, poke, demand, fight, right? When my need for attachment isn't met, you're going to hear about it from me. I will exhibit protest behaviors, and I will insist. It's like when I'm taking care of my baby nephew and I walk out of the room and he cries, that's his protest behavior. He's protesting the loss of connection in that moment. And that's baked in the cake of evolution. We all will protest the loss of connection. But temperament, socialization, gender socialization processes can kind of hone our protest behaviors in certain directions. And so withdrawers will often shut down, go blank, withdraw, dismiss, deny, avoid, sweep it under the rug, right? These are their ways of dealing with attachment disruption, attachment insecurity. And so again, my thing is I don't think there's a right way to be a person. I think there's a lot of right ways to be a person. And I think that there's actually, like, because I'm a pursuer, it took me a long time to appreciate that withdrawers bring a lot of wisdom to the work of attachment. The wisdom of not insisting on a big emotional conversation when you're just trying to enjoy the day. Actually, sometimes that does support attachment processes, right? And so there is a balance to be struck between pursuing and withdrawing. What I observe in long-term couples who kind of make it, who get to earn secure attachment and stay there pretty much, what I notice is that pursuers and withdrawers tend to find each other. And over time, they learn from each other. And pursuers learn to compartmentalize their emotions a bit in the way that withdrawers are so adept. And withdrawers learn to risk putting their feelings out there in the way that pursuers are so adept at doing. And that there's real wisdom in both of these sets of strategies. And it's about creating and maintaining balance in the emotional system of the relationship. Because if one person is stuck in the role of pursuer and one person is stuck in the role of withdrawer, what we notice is that the more the pursuer pursues, the more the withdrawer withdraws, because they're overwhelmed. They're overwhelmed by the intensity. Maybe they feel ashamed because they feel incompetent, that they don't know how to meet the pursuer's request for emotion or access to intimacy. It's not that they don't want to, they just feel often de-skilled or ill-equipped. And the pursuer, there's a phenomenon that we observe called the pursuer's paradox, which is the more that I pursue connectedness to you and the more you withdraw, the angrier I get and the more resentful I get. And then if I reach a point of a place of burning out and I become a burned out pursuer, I'm going to stop reaching. And the withdrawer definitely isn't reaching because they don't feel safe. And that's usually the last stop on the choo-choo train before breaking up. You got really locked into roles of pursuer withdrawer, and the pursuer tried everything and burned out and gave up, and then you're leading separate lives. And so de-escalating that cycle of pursuit and withdrawal is the essential task of couples therapy. But really, for me, it's taken years to fully appreciate that pursuers are not wiser than withdrawers. Pursuers, each brings different forms of wisdom, and I love both. The withdrawer wisdom is foreign to me, and so I get a little more intrigued by it. The pursuer wisdom is more innate to me. Pursuers tend to be aware that the emotional connection matters a whole hell of a lot. That's a conscious awareness for pursuers, right? And what couples therapists often observe is that in cisgender heterosexual couple pairings, the pursuer is often the woman, the withdrawer is often the guy, but not always. I've seen both. And so they're, whatever. I don't believe in gender. It's all made up, but like there may be a form of wisdom innate to women around the importance of emotional connectedness. I would be open to that possibility, which isn't to say that men don't have that wisdom sometimes, or buried below, right? That we have to kind of uncover and facilitate it to emerge. So yeah, let's pause here. Eleanor, do you want to jump in on any of this stuff?
Oh, this is so beautiful. You have covered this so skillfully.
Anyone else have any questions? Thanks, Eleanor. This might be our last slide. Oh yeah, okay. Well, just internal working models, basically, this is kind of the more nitty-gritty stuff around attachment style. The internal working model is the foundation of the attachment style is kind of placed on top of the internal working model, right? If I have a secure attachment style, that means my internal working model of self is I am basically good and trustworthy. Others are basically trustworthy and good. The world is basically a safe place, right? Insecure attachment styles like anxious avoidant is kind of like anxious is sort of like I view myself deep down as unworthy. I long for connection, but I perceive others as fundamentally unreliable in some way. Avoidant is more I do not experience myself as worthy of connectedness. I do not see other people as dependable. And so it's safer for me to be by myself, right? It's all about how we seek safety, how we get to feel safe. And the idea is that learning cognitively about this stuff cannot change your attachment style, but what can change your attachment style is having emotionally corrective experiences. And it's not as though you were avoidant and now you are secure. It's really like we move within our quadrant from wherever we're at towards secure. And as the cycle de-escalates, the differences between us become less pronounced. And here's just the last part about like what, okay, I like to say that trust is the juice that allows the machine of the relationship to make widgets, which is a silly thing. But like, if you imagine a romantic relationship as a machine, what you have to imagine is that the relationship needs to be able to produce a lot of different types of things, right? It has to produce emotional closeness. It has to produce sexuality that's fulfilling. It has to produce parenting that's effective if there's kids, right? So the machine of the relationship has to produce a bunch of different stuff. And trust is the WD-40. that allows the machine to produce those different widgets. And so, okay, how do you do trust? Well, John Gottman, essential researcher of attachment, looked at the science of trust. Yeah, and he wrote a book called The Science of Trust. And in that book, he says, here is if you break it down to its fundamental atom, here's what trust consists of. It's being emotionally attuned to your partner a gajillion times, right? Every time you have an emotion and I react appropriately by receiving it and validating it, that is a molecule of trust. And so if you can assemble 1,000 molecules, then you have more trust. And so he uses this, yeah, hit it.
There was a moment where you broke up while sharing that. Would you be open to just me 1 minute back after what Gottman says about trust? Give us a replay.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So Gottman says that trust, if you break trust down, oh, that's okay. Yeah, that Gottman wanted to understand scientifically what is trust. How do you define it, right? How do you measure it? And which is a cool thing to do. And so his research names that if you break down this idea of trust into its building blocks, into its atoms, then the atoms are moments of emotional attunement between partners. And that if you express an emotion or have an emotion and I react to you correctly, that's a moment of trust. That's an atom, a molecule of trust. And so when we assemble those molecules over and over and over and over and over again, then that's how we create trust or repair it when it's broken. And so he uses this acronym ATTUNE, right? I'm aware you're having an emotion, I turn toward it. I show you that I'm okay with the fact that you're having an emotion. I can tolerate it. I listen until you know that I understand your emotion. And I do it in a non-defensive way. And then I express compassion. And if I can do that, then you will experience me as trustworthy, and that will bring us closer. We'll be more emotionally connected. And so couples therapy is me facilitating that process over and over and over and over again, trusting that if they do this, they will feel closer. And as the couple feels closer and their trust is built or repaired, they start to come up with more ideas for how to solve their problems. And also their problems matter less. They become less preoccupied with their problems. Yeah, so that's it. I guess the final note is just like, what does this have to do with psychedelics? Which is that, yeah, do you want to share here, Eleanor?
I'll follow up. Sure.
I think for me, it's just that what we know from science is that trauma makes this harder. And again, trauma is a non-random distribution in society, right? And so women, people of color, sexual gender minorities have higher burdens of trauma because of rape culture, racism, homophobia, transphobia. And so we just know that trauma is not distributed randomly in society and that trauma creates barriers to attunement and attachment. And this takes us back to this idea of attachment justice, where I think psychedelics play a role is creating an equity option for individuals who are impacted by trauma that make it harder for them to do the secure attachment stuff. That, for example, ketamine, like in couples therapy, sometimes we use ketamine to help a really emotionally protected partner who is not comfortable emoting or only can emote with anger or is super intellectualized and it doesn't feel safe to experience emotion, that a meso or lower dose of ketamine can soften that system and can allow other emotional energies to emerge. And that creates opportunity to do the work of attunement. That's a ketamine version. An MDMA version, which is not legal to do yet, is to, right, give partners a mesodose of MDMA. MDMA reduces activity in the amygdala, which reduces the subjective sense of risk that's embedded in couples therapy. Oh my God, if I tell you how I really feel, are you gonna accept me? Right? It reduces that fear, and you get that surge of oxytocin. So it promotes the desire for bonding and connectedness. So there's a lot of applications for psychedelics to attachment processes that we're still emerging, developing. We don't have best practices. We don't have real protocols yet. People are developing these things in real time. A lot of it has been developed on the underground and is in use in those places, but that data hasn't been collected. And so it's still nascent. But for me, attachment is the most important thing. And I think that psychedelics can create opportunities where stuckness is present. Eleanor, do you want to share more on that?
Sure. Well, I feel like, we do have several webinars on psychedelic assisted therapy and the different forms of them. And we could spend hours talking about how they work neurologically. But in essence, one of the underpinnings of psychedelic assisted therapy, which is different than, for example, a ketamine infusion or IV, is that it's not the psychedelic, it's the therapy enhanced by the psychedelic.
Right.
And as we learn more about what the medicines do for us, they can really change the wiring of our brains in incredible ways, change the hormones we're experiencing in our body, soften defenses in a way that allows the couple therapy to be so much deeper.
Mm-hmm.
And I would be happy to hop on a discovery call with anyone who wants to hear a little bit more about that. We can also send out past webinars that explain more about ketamine, psilocybin, and these different medicines. But that would be the shortest answer, is that the medicines enhance the couple's therapy and allow it to move in a very, just like David said, allow it to move in more deeply.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, there's the important distinction is like we're not doing a psychedelic journey or trip when we do psychedelic assisted couples therapy. We're titrating the dose so that you're still present, you still have both feet in this world, but your system of emotional protectiveness is perhaps softened. There's more openness. You can do a deeper dive therapeutically. And again, with all psychedelics, it's not a panacea, but when used correctly, safely, appropriately, it can be understood as a therapy accelerant. And that's what we find is that, right, when I work with couples where there is no trauma history, for me, 4 to 13 sessions and couples are in and out most of the time. Right. And for couples where there's substantial trauma history for one or both partners, question mark. And I think that's what makes me mad. It's not fair. That's not fair. That's an equity issue. Why should this couple that had these exposure to trauma because of transphobia, because of racism, have to be stuck in therapy and paying more when it wasn't their fault that they are in a cycle of insecure attachment? And that's why I'm passionate about psychedelic assisted approaches, because it can create options for people who didn't get a fair shake for a secure attachment.
That's right.
That's
And
all
for
I have to
those of you,
say. Yeah.
David, thank you so much. And for folks, those of you that are interested in psychedelic assisted therapy couples work, Inner Path is incredibly excited about the possibility of bringing that forward. Had the we just had the idea for it. I don't know, maybe a few weeks ago. And so, if that's something you are interested in, go ahead and send us an email and we'll put you on the list. And as soon as couples assisted psychotherapy, either groups, individual, or a retreat is available, we'll let you know. Because, like we started this conversation with, when there is secure attachment at home, our entire planet will heal in 2 generations. You will get to be the person you came here to be. it will be a much easier and more rewarding experience of walking on this earth. And we want that for you. When our attachment at home is secure and functioning, it gives us the energy to go out into the world and do the things we need to do. And David, thank you so much for coming and sharing so much with us. You are a wheelhouse of knowledge. We are so grateful.
Thank you so much, Eleanor, for having me. I think that mansplaining attachment theory is definitely not a problem for me. I'm always happy to share because this stuff matters a lot to me. And there's so much more to say. Yeah, but I'm happy to be here, and anyone can reach out to me with any questions as well, and I'm always happy to be in touch.
Thank you, David. Bye for now, everybody.
Bye-bye.